Today we're talking to Joseph Altuzarra. It's been so long since Joseph and I have had a
So
good
long, too
conversation.
long.
Too long. But you know why we haven't had a good conversation? We've had a year. As I was just saying, Time Magazine's cover of the moment, 2020 with a big cross through it, the worst year ever. So how has the year been for you, Joseph?
Oh God, that's a loaded question. It's been an okay year. I think we've obviously all gone through so much change. I've also gone through a lot of personal life change. I don't know. I sort of before we're gonna like dive straight. I feel like every time I talk to you, I'm like in therapy. We're gonna dive straight into my therapy session. But I had like all of these, in 2018, I started getting these panic attacks. And when the pandemic started, I was really concerned that they were gonna come back and that I was going, just like the anxiety of going through the moment that we're going through. And I was, talking to my therapist and like trying to figure out a plan, what to do if they come back. And actually, they haven't. And I think I found this moment like really liberating in a really odd way. And I'm quite happy.
Do you think it was because the challenges that you were forced to deal with this year were so huge and outside yourself that actually you ended up being taken away from yourself to deal with these other crises?
I think it's that, the challenges in the world kind of dwarfed your own personal challenges. But I also think I realized that there was this kind of, in fashion, I feel like there's this kind of like veneer of success that you're constantly sort of performing. And this like fear of failure if you're not kind of following the lead of these big brands and you're not kind of performing as like a successful business, which means like you're really like following very rigid rules. You're sort of having to, and I can't find another word than performative. Like it's very performative to me. And actually like the fact that the world has changed so much and the fact that we've kind of been allowed, if not kind of encouraged, to let go of the rules and I think try new things, be way more experimental, also be much more vulnerable with each other. Like we've been on a lot of Zooms for, rewiring fashion. I was on Zooms with Dries, and I was really struck by how, a year ago, you'd go to the Elysee with all the other designers, French designers, and like you're all in a room and you're kind of like, it's like small talk and you're all like, hi, how's it going? Oh, great. Everything's really good. How's your business? My business is really great. Like super performative. And then you'd get on these Zooms like a year later and you're like, oh my God, like my production chain is like totally messed up. And like, I had to let go of like 30% of my business. And there's this like actually really interesting, thing that happens when you're like truly vulnerable with each other and you like actually like see each other. I think it kind of like takes the pressure off.
So there's a sort of genuine transparency then. It's not just bullshit.
Exactly.
And
And
then
I think fashion was a lot of, I mean, for me, like there was a lot of bullshit.
yeah. And so in the situation where everybody's trying to be really honest with each other, and there's nothing to be gained by doing the song and dance about how fabulous everything is, do you feel you've learned things then, like and actually you've been talking to designers you've probably never spoken to before in this
Yeah,
really kind of heart to heart way? um Not just it was performative, is it now transformative?
it is. I really think it is. I mean, the amount of like exchanging of ideas, it has transformed our business. I mean, some of the things that we talked about during, and I'm not trying to plug your, rewiring fashion, but like some of the things that came up, some of the issues that came up and that we discussed in groups really passionately and from the heart, like calendar and how many seasons we should be having, should we be having shows, how are you going to show, this is how I'm going to show, and how much money do you spend on this? And like we've gone from from having 4 seasons a year, we're now doing 2. We didn't do a show last season, we're not going to do a show next season. It's really changed our entire kind of strategy about the business, and a lot of that I kind of have, conversations with other designers to thank for. It's just been, yeah, really, really transformative and really liberating.
But you said you didn't do a show, but you did have a virtual presence
We
during
did.
the virtual fashion week in Paris. You
Yeah.
actually staged a show that
Yeah.
was filmed, and you put that online. How did you feel about that?
Um,
Did you feel it was a placeholder, or do you feel it was a sort of you were invested in showing people what you'd done, so that's what you gave us?
I think I was invested in following, I was still invested in following a format that people were familiar with. I think, like, to me, there was this sense that like everything had changed, and everything was digital. And my sense was that people just really wanted to see clothes, like that they wanted a kind of direct approach. And that, to be honest, was also what I was responding to. I think brands have had, I mean, I've seen some amazing projects, like there's been so much creativity and experimentation, but I've enjoyed the ones I think the most where I've been able to like actually see the clothes. Like there was something very like direct, for instance, about Prada. Like it was very like direct, wasn't super high concept, but I liked that I could like see what it was.
At the same time, though, it was illuminated by a concept. There was something going on
Yes.
there with the way it was filmed, with the way the models approached the camera. There was a sort
Yeah.
of relationship there that I found very intriguing. There was a sort of, or maybe intelligent, maybe even an intellectual component to that presentation that
Yeah.
I thought elevated it beyond the straight kind of
For
walking.
sure. It was definitely more than like a straight runway.
But when you say you saw, you wanted things where you could see the clothes, what comes to mind specifically when you say that?
Like there were presentations that I had seen that I thought were really interesting brand, um, you know, brand pieces, but not necessarily interesting collections. Or like I couldn't tell what the collection looked like. And that's a decision like you make for yourself. I just felt, Altuzarra is not like a super high concept brand. Like in a way, it's a very like personal brand. But it's always been really about clothes, like about sort of what's on the runway. And so for me, that was really what was important
But
to show.
you know what I thought was so interesting, because you did show models walking towards the camera, and it was like a filmed catwalk presentation, and I saw other filmed catwalk presentations that were that were as banal as that idea sounds, you
Yeah.
know? I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here when I say that there was something about yours that made me watch it a few times. And I felt that, oh, where are you? There you are. I felt I got a message there. You know what drew me in and held me in a funny way, apart from the clothes, because we'll talk about that in a minute. I was fascinated how the collection had shifted in
Yeah.
emphasis so radically, was the music. And it was
Mm.
like being at a fashion show where I'm sitting there, and you know, there's a joke that how much I always kind of go on about music and fashion shows. Your thing, the music, held you, you know,
Mm. Oh, I'm so glad.
but it was a very interesting point because I'm sitting here thinking, this is girls walking in a concrete warehouse,
Yeah.
concrete bunker, and they're not doing anything. They're literally walking towards the camera. There's a side camera, there's a head-on view, then they leave and there's somebody
Yeah.
else comes in. And it there was a pace and a rhythm, and I thought, oh my God, that is being dictated by the soundtrack. And I
Yeah.
thought that was an object lesson in economy of means
Yeah.
working really, really well, I thought.
Oh, I'm so glad you liked it.
No, but
Yeah, the music was a really, I mean, it was really a fundamental part of it, just because, I mean, you know, we talk about this often. I also love music, and I think music at a show is so important. But I think it is sort of, it can sort of hold you in that place of being
and
around.
move you on and
Yeah,
propel you and you know, that's what happened. And I thought, wow, that was like a proper old school fashion show.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't know, I'm not 100% sure that I'll do it again in that way. It was, to me, I really approached that presentation and that show as like, this is a marker of a very specific time in like the life of the company and in my life. Um, and I actually quite liked, I know, you know, other people did more, they did physical objects, or I quite liked that this was ephemeral, that there was this, you know, this kind of, you watch the show and then it's over and there's not, it kind of disappears into like the ether of the internet. Like there was something about
Forever.
that I thought was very, um, that felt appropriate for the moment we were living in.
So the clothes, because the clothes had an airiness and a lightness and a sort of utility
Yeah,
that was very striking. Also, a sense of history that I thought was very interesting as well. I was sitting there thinking French Revolution because
yeah,
I'm also very, very big on revolution. I think the critical, I mean, the how essential it is that there has to be a revolution in so many areas, politically, economically, socially. Anyway, that's just me. But there was a sense of I saw the merveilleuse, you know, at the end of the French Revolution,
yeah,
the way the dresses were sort of draped and bustled, and the bras and the sort of the sheerness of the clothes and the volumes. It felt to me like in my state of mind, it felt like a sort of you were tipping the cap towards a time, a sort of revolutionary sensibility, not a fashion revolution per se, but just a little bit of that, the Frenchness of them, the kind of
yeah. I mean, when I started working on the collection, you know, to be really honest, I just wanted to make clothes that were really emotional and really desirable. And I was not interested in making loungewear. I mean, I'm being totally honest. Like like I wanted, and I also was really interested in kind of clothes that took up space, like physically took up space, which is why we just did things that had a lot more volume. We were looking at a lot of things like kind of 17th century bustles, or crinolines that had been kind of deflated, and but really the idea that I wanted to just take up room, like physically take up room. And I don't know if that's because like you felt so self-contained and so small in your house, and like you couldn't, you were so kind of invisible. Everyone was so invisible in a way. That was really, I remember that being kind of the impetus at the very beginning of the collection. And then I was also really interested, I thought it was kind of funny to think about, everyone was talking about loungewear and about clothes for inside and clothes you wear at home. And I thought it was really interesting to think about like underwear, and how, no one was really talking about underwear, and how there was a way of, I love like 1930s, 20s, 30s, like underwear, and how like complicated like women's undergarments used to be. And this really interesting way of, how intricate they were, and how there was this interesting way of kind of deconstructing them and including them into the clothes, kind of as an intellectual exercise. And I thought it was kind of whimsical. I thought it was funny to me.
But we've talked in the past when and after your collections, we always end up talking about sex, because you're quite upfront about the sexual element in your clothing. And when you talk about, people have often spoken about you being a sort of an heir to Tom Ford in a way, and how much you found Tom Ford such a sexual, inspiring, because he was such a sexual creature. What was interesting in this collection was it was sensual more than sexual.
It was.
That felt not just a response to the moment, because the whole notion of touch has been something which has been deprived. We've been deprived of it for the last 9 months or so, but it felt to me like a much more meditative collection, like a sort of mature, what I want from life now. I know that you're a father, and you're a new father, and Emma is one.
Yeah.
She walks around so much for a 1-year-old.
I know,
You're
right?
very precocious. And Seth and you have been married now for how many years?
7 years.
7 years. So you are, everything that 37 years old. Everything that was, so when you were young, when you were a kid, when you started out in fashion and you were doing these clothes that looked like Montana or Elia or something, or Tom Ford, it was all about this sort of aspiration towards this sort of really grown-up decadent sexuality. And now you have these things in your life, like a child and a husband and a wonderful life on Long Island, I would imagine. Suddenly that must seem rather,
but what's so weird, what's so interesting though, as you're talking about this, it's almost like I have a little bit of I think the reason why this sort of happened is that I have been, first I started collecting art during the pandemic, and the art that I'm collecting is pretty much all queer and pretty like fetishistic. Like Tom of Finland.
how can you afford it? It's horrifically expensive.
Peter Hujar.
Oh God, fabulous. Like, what have you bought from Peter Hujar?
Oh, I bought the David Wojnarowicz portrait.
Uh-huh.
I bought like a drag portrait.
Did you buy that in auction?
Mm-hmm.
Did you buy it at Swan?
Yeah.
I was bidding against you.
No. I bought the tweeter. I bought the Tom of Finland at Swan too.
Oh yes, the same auction. It was a good auction.
It
Yeah.
was the fucker
Yeah.
one. And I bought the Maplethorpe at Swan too. There was a Maplethorpe, very sexual, that hand painted photograph, like a man with a penis.
Mm. Oh yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I know who was bidding for that one as well. So yeah. Wonderful knowing who your competition is.
I know. Good to know. But I think I sort of have like sublimated those desires and impulses into that, and also into how I dress more. I think like I've sort of integrated that sort of fetishistic side into how I personally dress more, which is weird because you'd think as a father I'd be wearing like, I'd be wearing the yoga pant Tribeca mom uniform, but I like show up there in my leather pants and my big boots. But I think it sort of gave, I think it gave more room for softness and sensuality in the Altuzarra language. Not that like that fetishistic kind of more sexual side won't come back. But yeah, even though I'm a father, I'm still a little kinky at heart.
Twisted. But how, because I did feel that collection, it was very coherent. It was very focused, and it was lovely.
Thank you.
How you see that as a response to the situation that we've been in, then that sort of the sensuality, the sort of softness of it, the reassurance and the calmness. You see that isn't necessarily Altuzarra going forward, that it will once again become those quite rigorous, you could see yourself going back to a sort of rigorous, or
I do.
what I should say, to a sort of rigorous point of view again.
I do.
What was the response to that? What was the response to that collection like?
Really good, actually. I think people really liked, and people really loved the very emotional things, like the look one dress that's like super draped and very voluminous, or I think people wanted emotion, and they wanted things that kind of made them feel a sense that, oh, I haven't seen this before, and this is super desirable, and I don't even know exactly where I'm going to wear this, but I just covet it. I want it. We have a strong business in, what I would call, real everyday clothes. And a lot of women come to us for that. But for this collection, I just felt I wanted clothes that felt like just deeply original and desirable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because fashion, that is the fundamental, that is the foundation of fashion, desire. And it's interesting to see you exploring the different desire. Can be a number. There are a lot of different shadings to desire.
Yeah. And I also feel like this is not, for me at least, I'm speaking very personally, every business is very different, but for me, this is not the moment to be cautious. You know, it's not the moment to be shy or to retreat. I actually think this is the moment to like be more vulnerable, be more emotional, be more, you know, take more risks with your work, with the way that you're doing things, with your strategies. I just think, why not? Like, why not kind of put it all on the table? And if you make a mistake, you know, if it messes up, if it's like a bad collection, if people don't respond, then like you move on. It's okay.
It doesn't concern you that you're courting misunderstandings with that a little bit, that to you know, if people have become accustomed to seeing you in one way.
I think there's this like,
I mean, I love it. I love
I
that
think
notion.
there's this like, you know, I remember a couple of seasons ago doing a collection, and a buyer wrote me an email saying like, you shouldn't try to be something that you're not. The collection was not Altuzarra.
Which
Like,
one
it
was
was
it?
like,
Which one? Which one?
I can't tell you. But I actually think like we've sort of, we have entered or have been living in sort of this over branded world for a really long time now. And I think it's sort of, there is like a side to me that misses the time when designers, I think, felt like they could experiment more, and be a little more fearless, and like you weren't going to get a slap on the wrist because it didn't feel like what you've been doing for the last few years. And I don't know, it may be a mistake, you know, I may sort of take it back. But I think I do.
What would constitute a mistake for you then? Like it didn't sell, or the women that you trust as your customers would say to you, you know, this doesn't speak to me anymore? Or what would a mistake?
Yeah, I think that would be sort of a mistake. Like a few seasons ago, for instance, we tried doing mini skirts, which like you wouldn't think is like that crazy, but people just didn't, were like, oh, that doesn't feel like Altuzarra. It, you know, it doesn't feel like the brand. But I'm really happy we did them. Like it was like, I really was feeling mini skirts, and I thought it was, you know, I don't regret it. I I don't want to feel like I'm living in this like gilded cage of my own brand, and that I can't, you know, explore different things. And as you know, like I think I'm, you know, I'm super curious, and I'm curious about a lot of different things. Like I'm not just curious about, you know, Corinne Reutfeld and, you know, 80s Thierry Mugler. Like I'm curious about lots of things that are.
On which note, I've never, I can say this in all honesty, never had a designer send me a copy of Dune to prepare me for his new collection, his or her new collection. But you sent me a copy of Dune by
Yeah,
Frank Herbert, science fiction classic, which I'm very grateful for. I've never read it. I'm having terrible trouble reading in lockdown. I don't know. A lot of people have said the same thing. They're having trouble reading, but I am looking forward to curling up with it. As an introduction to the collection, it was a surprise. You know,
yeah,
like you're just saying there, it was very unpredictable. You sent me books in the past, which are more connected to how I've seen
yeah.
Altuzarra. But I'm curious to hear how Dune reflected on the new collection, especially because there's a new movie coming out. Denis Villeneuve has remade
Yes,
the film, and David Lynch
yeah.
version of it, and yeah.
I mean, when I mean, I am a huge reader, and actually, I've sort of had the opposite. I think the opposite thing happened to me, which is that I've become even more avid during lockdown.
Even with a 1-year-old.
Even with a 1-year-old, yeah. I spend about 2 to 3 hours reading after she goes to bed. But I think I love it so much because I think it forces you to imagine things. And I think like during this time, during the world, this world we live in, when you're constantly scrolling and you're being kind of force-fed images, or you're watching TV or you're watching movies, it's great. I love it. It's a big part of how I get inspiration. But there is something really nice about not seeing something, and they're describing clothes or they're describing a world, and you sort of have to like imagine it. And when I was starting on the collection, I was reading Dune, and I tackled all of these books that I had always wanted to read and were just like intimidating.
What else?
Like all 900 pages of it.
Stephen King.
Huh?
Stephen King.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd never read it. People loved it. I liked it a lot. I didn't, it wasn't like transcendent for me. But yeah, there were a bunch of books that I read like that I was just like, okay. Or Handmaid's Tale, and then the Testaments. I never read that. But there was something about really interesting about Dune. I can't say it's the most pleasurable reading experience if you do end up reading it, because like, there's a lot of made up words, and there's a lexicon at the end of the book that you have to like refer back to understand what they're talking about. And it's not, it's not like, it took me like a good month to go through. But what I really loved was this, it was really an ecological novel. Oh yeah, there you go. It was a book about sort of a world with kind of scarce resources and survival clothes, like clothes to survive in a kind of drastically kind of inhuman or hostile to humanity. And I thought that was a really interesting beginning, because you have this the main character sort of evolves from this world of decadence, and where water and food is available, and he's very free, and then he has to move into this like onto this desert-like planet and learn how to kind of adapt. And I thought it was an interesting metaphor, both for how like we as a society, how we were sort of going through this moment, but also for our business and how to adapt, how to sort of transform yourself in difficult times, and sort of embracing that.
Well, that's a hell of a lot more interesting to me than all the people who read Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead to try and get a grip on their business. I mean, Dune feels like a much more intriguing kind of roadmap to the future.
It was, and it's actually quite a hopeful book. Although to be fair, I haven't read like the 15 sequels to Dune. So I don't exactly know what happens. But it felt like quite a hopeful book. And I loved the idea of sending it. I mean, I've always sent books after the collections, as you know. But this one felt really quite personal, and a glimpse into sort of how I was also feeling about the world.
Are you surprised by the fact that fashion can speak to you like that? Fashion can speak to you with the voice of Dune. That now that you are 37, 37 is an age when some people start their careers in fashion, and you've reached a point. It's funny, I was talking to Jack and Lazaro from Proenza Schooler a few weeks ago, and I was thinking about their new collection, how you started with them as, you know, you all started super young, but with these incredibly grown up, sophisticated, sexy collections. Like really at the time, a completely new voice in American fashion, a new mood in American fashion, these very precocious young people making very sophisticated clothes. And it seems to me that now all of you, still very young, have it's almost like reverse evolution from this very kind of hard edge, quite sexual clothing to this sort of innocent, soft, idealistic clothing.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you've gone from being grown up to being, I would say, naive, but in a good way.
Yeah. I think there has been that evolution for me. I think for me, there's been a personal journey. And in a way, and we've talked about this before, but, you know, I think when I started as a designer and I started the collection, a lot of the collection was about my own insecurities and this, you know, very this kind of alter ego that I was creating, this very kind of hard-edged, fearless alter ego, warrior woman, was kind of how I pictured her. And I think as I have grown up and as I've become, I think, more and more comfortable in my own skin and in my own sexuality and my own kind of life, I think it's almost like the armor has come off a little bit. And this, like, there's no longer this need to be so hard. And there's just more softness, I think.
Yeah, and you know, fashion is a mirror.
It is, and if anything, I think this whole moment, right, like this whole moment we're living through and talking to other designers, I think it's actually made me realize, in this age of like super branding and like everything is like, you know, a brand guideline and like the brand is basically just me. It's basically just like a super personal reflection of who I am, and what I'm going through and my personal journey, which I think is actually, you know, we talk about sort of the ecosystem of fashion and big brands versus small brands and how it's important to have kind of the mix of it's important to sort of have this kind of ecosystem. But I think that's what a lot of independent brands bring, you know, when you look at Simone Rocha or you look at, you know, even Jonathan Anderson at JW, or you look at, you know, a lot of independent brands that, you know, we've been talking to. I think it's this very kind of personal, authentic expression of who the founders are. That feels very, I think it feels really important.
Do you think that's going to become even more significant in the future with what we've just been through, that the industry is going to change? We hope the industry is going to change, and that actually fashion refreshes its sense of who it is who makes fashion. that it isn't kind of gigantic brands building billion-dollar businesses on shoes and handbags. That it's actually the people you're talking about, the independent thinkers, the people who are driven to create fashion because it's what they have to do. It's not to become billionaires. It's because this is how they fulfill themselves. This is how they satisfy their creative urges. Do you think
I
it? Do you
think
think that's going to become
so.
more
I
important?
think that it will. I think that it will become more and more important. And actually, it was something I was thinking about earlier. I think the interesting thing about brands like Balenciaga or Gucci about their success is that they actually feel like independent brands that are creator led with all of their kind of esoteric, weird interests. They just happen to be backed by, billion-dollar conglomerates. But I think that the fact that they are emulating kind of the emotion that you get from these small independent designers, I think is like kind of it's kind of a sign that that is becoming more and more important. I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally. I mean, it's a very idealistic point of view because money talks, and
It is. No, totally.
But at the same time, I don't see how fashion stays relevant without that, to be honest, because
Yeah.
we've had this 180-degree flip, and it seems that if fashion is going to mean anything in people's lives, it has to be about people making things, creating things, because that's what they live to do. And it doesn't really matter if the rest of the world isn't getting it. And also they cost this much money because somebody took the time to make it. And it's not about a $1 bikini. It's about somebody weaving a fabric, somebody embroidering a fabric, somebody cutting it into a piece of clothing that the customer is the end, that receives it at the end of the line. And it's this sort of, the whole thing is a relationship.
Yeah.
And I've been in my sunnier moments in the last few months, imagining that those relationships are going to be the foundation of a new kind of fashion industry, where who's buying your clothes, and you aren't going to be putting them on sale 6 weeks after they go into a shop. It's not going to be like that anymore. It's a sort of no waste. You, like in your collection, for example, using dead stock and recycling and so on. It's interesting seeing things that nobody would have a clue that that's what they are, because they're just so lovely.
Yeah.
And a total reevaluation of what's precious and of what constitutes value. Something is valuable because of this, not because it costs a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
I live in this sort of idealistic fog,
but I think you're right. And to be honest, I think a whole new generation of people who are becoming customers also live in that kind of idealistic fog, as you call it. Like I think that they really believe that that the industry needs to be transformed, and that as a customer they have more than just the responsibility to look good. They also have to kind of do good and support companies that are good.
Has having Emma changed the way you feel about the industry?
Yeah, it does. It has. So in sometimes surprising ways. Like I really feel, I've always felt this way. I've always felt that the industry gets a really bad rap, and like actually we're like somewhat like one big family. And I have like real, wonderful friends who, you know, after having a child, I think it's made me actually, it's made me appreciate my relationships in the industry a lot more, and realize like how personal and close I am to people. But I also think, that was kind of surprising. I think it definitely puts things into perspective also. And, you know, I was always like a little bit uncomfortable, you know, talking about clothes like I'm curing cancer. But I think now, like, I really feel, I feel like, you know, there's so many kind of problems in the world, and there are so many, and I think we have a part to play in this industry, a big part to play. But I think it's also made me realize, I think that it's more than just making people look good. You know, like, I think we can actually we can change the world. We can make a significant change.
Do you what do you picture for what you do? What do you picture about what you're doing when she's 16 years old, for example? What do you imagine now that you have that acute responsibility when you're looking forward to when she's 16, or what you're the average age of your customer, what, 30 or 40, or
Yeah.
imagine
Well,
her.
it's interesting. There are two things that I think a lot about. One is sustainability, for sure, which I think has become a much more important kind of practice, everyday practice, for us. Another one is gender. Like, I think the idea of kind of men and women, and, you know, separate clothes, and gender rules. I've become a lot more sensitive to it as she's grown, as I've watched her grow. And this idea that, like, oh, she has to dress in pink, or she has to have, you know, pigtails, or, you know, like, why is that? And why? And it feels kind of not very modern to me. Like, it doesn't feel like, and that's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and a lot about in the collection, unexpectedly, because it's not something that I thought about before.
How on earth would that sensibility manifest itself in Altuzarra as we've known it up until this point? That's a very, very interesting question.
I don't know, but it's been a really, and maybe it's something new, but it's been something that's been kind of weighing on me, I think, a lot more since having Emma.
What do you see in her natural reaction to things? A sort of completely open curiosity about everything, or do you see her gravitating towards certain things that make you think, oh yes, there's a sensibility taking shape?
You mean about her, what she's gravitating
What she
towards?
loves. What does she love?
She's very, very physical. Like, she's super athletic. So she loves like moving. She loves climbing. She's really a fearless person, and she loves books. I can't say that she's like a real like girly girl into doll little girl. She and it's an interesting kind of, it's interesting because obviously we don't know the egg donor. So there's like kind of a set of like genetics that's also unknown. So there are things that I sort of see in my, sort of see could come from me. But then there are things that I'm like, wow, that's totally like out of nowhere.
Well, as you were saying before, when you started your collection, you started your business as a sort of, as a way to remake yourself, as a way to create a new identity for yourself that would kind of turn its back on all the insecurities and all the the way you treated yourself basically in the past. And you were going to make a, you were going to recreate a Tom Ford style persona of complete self-assurance and sexual confidence and everything. And it's interesting to be confronted by a little person who has this self-assurance and this sense of self right off the bat. I love that. I can't wait to see what you do with this.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's definitely, I feel like all of these new passions and new interests have sort of bubbled up that I'm really keen on kind of following and just diving into.
Like what?
I mean, like this whole this whole genderless idea, I think is something I'm super passionate about.
Is this the next collection?
I don't know that it's the next collection. I think maybe it's just something new. I don't know. For some reason, gender has been like I've been reading a lot about it. I've been thinking a lot about it. And it's something that I find that I find really modern and really, I don't know, really fascinating as a kind of exercise.
Wow. Well, I think that's it for today, but we sure as hell have opened the door for the next conversation.
I mean, I told you, every time we talk, I always feel like it's therapy, which I love.
I find it very therapeutic as well, I can tell you. But Joseph, it's lovely to see you, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to see each other this year. Or did we?
But hopefully I mean, my parents actually are still in London, so hopefully we will head over there soon.
God knows I'm not going anywhere. So wonderful to see you, and lots of.
It was so nice to see you.
And I will curl up with my Dune.
Okay.
And
I'll send you more of my recommendations from this year.
I'll try and put the pieces together. I will read Cast.
And Cast. Actually, read Cast before Dune.
Cast is on my list, so I'm looking forward to that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Lots of love.
Love to.